Okay, I'm going to start the session because I feel it's been a very, very long day, and I'm impressed to have all you people here after what's been a very long day. And the sooner we get on with it, the better, I think. So just to start, it's a Bright Blue event in partnership with LV = General Insurance. And Bright Blue is an independent think tank, which some of you will already know, and the pressure group for liberal conservatism, which is still live and well despite the events of 2019. That bit's not Bright Blue sanctioned, by the way, that's just me riffing. Its 7 major research themes are bountiful economy, clean environment, good lives, rewarding work, empowering government, just institutions, and connected communities. And if you do feel like tweeting, which some of you probably do, it's hashtag Bright Blue, hashtag CPC21, and maybe you should follow at We Are Bright Blue. And I'm not being paid to do this. I'm doing this actually because I haven't chaired any party fringes for about a decade. But when I was asked to do this by the think tank, I felt it was an opportunity for me to learn a bit about electric cars, which is something that I really don't know enough about. But luckily we have a star panel of speakers. We have to my left, Hugh Merriman, who is the chair of the Transport Select Committee and also the MP for Bexhill and Battle. We have to my further left, he'll walk in 5 minutes' time, Nicholas Hellen, who's the transport editor at the Sunday Times, and he is a bit lost, so his grasp of the transport system may be not as good as the FT's transport editor, but I won't mention that to him. And we have to my right, Gill Nowell, who's the head of EV at LV = General Insurance, and before that she was DSO lead at Electrolink and co-founded the Electric Vehicle Association. And to my far right, but not politically far right, Patrick Hall, Senior Research Fellow at Bright Blue. And I thought I would just we will come to questions quite quickly, I think. Someone has their hand up already. No, you don't. Okay. So I'm going to start with a few questions just to warm up our panel. And frankly, I'll start with the first question, which is, one of the big questions for consumers, including myself and probably a lot of people in this room, is, of course, electric cars still more expensive than their petrol, diesel, and indeed hybrid equivalents. And how long do we think it will be before price parity between EVs and old-fashioned fossil fuel vehicles is achieved? And maybe Gill go first. And part of this question, I suppose, is if you look at the life cycle of the car, we should presumably be including not only the initial cost of the vehicle, but also the cost of the fuel/electricity that goes into it. But Gill, do you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Jim, and it's brilliant to be here. So I've been kind of working in and around electric cars for almost 10 years now. So I've driven lots of different types of electric cars. I've been an EV owner myself for over 2 years now. And the thing that strikes me as an electric car driver is actually that the longer you drive an electric car, the better value it becomes actually. I'm fortunate in that I can charge my car at home. So it costs me on average about 2 pence per electric mile as opposed to 15 pence in diesel. Incredibly low maintenance costs, 0 road tax, all that kind of good stuff. However, in terms of the upfront sticker price, so LV General Insurance has found that actually 45% of people across the UK are put off sort of making the switch to an electric car because of that upfront cost, the sticker price. Luckily, as LVGI, we've done a piece of work that is called the Electric Car Cost Index that's really crunched the numbers on total cost of ownership. So that's in recognition of the fact that even though the upfront cost may be more than a petrol or diesel equivalent, when you take into account the cost of charging, that's actually whether at home or on street perhaps, when you take into account the savings that you will accrue over the lifetime of the vehicle, then the Electric Car Cost Index has found that actually already there are quite a few battery electric cars out there that are better value over a 4 or even 7-year lease period. And I can name those cars if you like. So they are the Nissan Leaf, the VW ID3, and the MG ZS EV. And actually, I did pick up over the weekend that somebody pointed out to me that even now, you can, if you were to compare a Golf, a VW Golf and a VW ID3, they're both at about the 32,000, 33,000 mark. And the VW ID3 is bigger and it comes with cruise control, whereas the Golf doesn't. But I think what's really important in terms of looking at price parity is that that's fine for people who can afford a new car. But what we really need to see happen actually is for the second-hand market for electric cars being stimulated far more than it is now.
Fantastic. So now we have the full panel of all five of us. I think we're going to have speeches or little introductory remarks where they try and address some of the issues around electric vehicles, introduce themselves, talk about their sort of viewpoint on electric cars. And we're going to start with Hugh Merriman, MP, Chair of the Transport Select Committee.
Jim, thanks ever so much. And Gill, thank you very much for having us and also for Bright Blue having us as well, Patrick. And thanks, Nicholas, for promoting active travel and getting here. I'm really sort of going to plug the Select Committee's report that we put out on zero-emission vehicles. It was a sort of two-parter, Jim, actually. One of it was how do we actually move towards the rollout of electric vehicles as we try and hit the Prime Minister's 2030 target in terms of the end of sales of the combustion engine. But also the second part, which we're about to start on, is about road pricing. And I won't talk to that, but I'm very grateful to Bright Blue, who've given us some really excellent evidence. And this is a great area because it ticks all the boxes that really get me going. So it's all about how do we decarbonise. It's all about how do we actually take advantage of new technology and innovate. And actually by doing that, how do we actually make things a lot better in the process? But there is a big challenge. There is a straight line from where we are now to 2030. And actually we're nowhere near that. So there's a lot that the government actually needs to do. And this is one of these classic spaces. If the government actually does too much in what is a private market, then it could actually ruin the market solution for this. So getting the sort of right touch for government is essential. But there is a lot of progress that needs to be made. Firstly, as Gill touched on, the sales, whilst they're welcome in terms of the increase. So we actually saw a decrease of sales of cars, but an increase, I think about 185% increase of electric vehicles over, I think it was the last year. I think it's gone up even more now, Gill. But actually that still accounts for about just over 6% of the entire market. So there's a lot more that needs to be shifted. And Gill, you've touched on the used car market. It's just 0.3% is electric. There isn't really a car market. And all those sold that I've just touched on, the 6.6%, only about 2% is actually going to the private customer. A lot of it is fleet and business. So we need to actually move the market. And then how do we do this? So a lot of these issues around range anxiety. It's slightly ironic given what's happened the last week. People are concerned that they might run out of electric. I can tell you I haven't got any fuel in my car and I've been doing my work across my 200 square miles by bike and rail. Good for the carbon footprint, not necessarily for my limbs. But it's a real sort of challenge for us to actually get people over that. And part of this is the rollout, obviously, of the charge infrastructure. I'll talk about that, but I just want to come back to the ideas about how we get more people buying. So the committee made a recommendation in our report that we have what's called a zero emissions vehicle mandate. As things stand at the moment, the government has to plug in hybrid grants, so basically taxpayers subsidising perhaps those that are more well off to buy an electric vehicle, to the tune of 135 million each year. That is going to be phased out. I and the committee would like the idea that the motor manufacturers basically buy and sell credits. So if you're a motor manufacturer that doesn't sell much electric into the market, then you have to buy credits off those motor manufacturers that do. What that should then do is see the price reduced, because that money then is used as a subsidy by those manufacturers to reduce the price of the car, but also it encourages those that are having to buy the credit because they don't put in enough electric vehicles into the market to do so. Otherwise they're effectively paying the competition to take their margin away from them. So that's an idea that I'm really pleased the government have now adopted in the transport decarbonisation plan. What I know after my 6 years in politics, and you will, Jim, and indeed Nicholas, there's one thing the government's saying they're going to do it, and another actually holding the feet to the fire so they actually deliver it. So I think that's vital. It's certainly the case that we've seen the price of the electric vehicles come down. it was interesting that when this grant I talked about only applied it had a cap of 50,000 and then got reduced to £35,000, the price of the vehicles miraculously then came down to £35,000. Funny that. So I think that would be an idea to actually stimulate the market and demand and actually get more supply into the system. Then what do we do about getting more charging infrastructure in place? So we've got 20,000 charge points, 4,000 of those are the highly charged charge points. I've been to see charge point with the committee and really sort of see what technology is there. I like the idea though that if you think of a cash point card, you can use any cash machine. It shouldn't charge you, I never used to. There's no what we call interoperability at the moment in the market. So that means that the consumer's confused, they have to have different accounts, too many apps. It would be nice to actually see that interoperability work so that you can just pay using any. And again, that will encourage. The other issue we've got is the grid, Jim. The national grid is going to come under a lot of pressure, and our committee's called for it to be mapped properly. We heard from one consultant that said that if 2 out of 10 car owners came back and charged their car between 6 and 7 on a bigger estate, then actually it would blow the grid for that estate. So we now need to use price as a lever to get people charging up when the grid can take it and people getting used to charging little but often. That again, I think would sort of make price as a lever nudge towards that aspect. And there's another part which is rather boring called way leaves, which effectively means that you can, a property owner can ransom strip. And I think that does need government reform to ensure that just like certain other utilities, you can't actually hold out because some of this infrastructure just can't be delivered because the price of going over someone's land is just too great. So I'll stop there because there'll be some other ideas that come out in the process, Jim. But as a committee, we're really excited about this technology. But I'll leave you with this warning. I, along with a third of households in this country, do not have means to charge up from my home. So I don't have an electric vehicle. Well, you could say, well, why don't you charge up on the lamppost? Well, because I live in a village that doesn't have any lampposts. It's a dark night village, as they proudly call it, which means you can't get around unless you've got a mobile phone torch. So, the solution for rural parts is actually going to be somewhat greater. And that's where the market arguably is not going to deliver. But we can't get to a situation as we've had with broadband and mobile phone, where some people have access and some don't.
So this comes to my next question, which is a very quick one for the panel. Which of you drive, or what do you drive?
Active travel. I walk. Don't have a car.
Of any kind. What about you, Jill?
So I'm on my second electric car. So my first was a second-hand Nissan Leaf, 30 kilowatt hour, and I currently drive a Kia e-Niro.
I, much to my shame, have a diesel family car. Don't kill me.
No, but I'm the same, and don't be ashamed. The challenge for us is actually how we can then move to something like an electric vehicle because we're able to do so. I mean, don't be ashamed.
I'd like the next one to be electric. And what about you, Nicholas?
It's a 19-year-old Passat, which has done 200,000 miles.
This doesn't sound electric.
It was valued for a Sunday Times piece about 3 years ago, at which point it was valued at £75.
So it's probably now worth about £32.50.
It's never broken down, and the mechanic says it's only just getting worn in.
But I guess, and we can come to this
great
question.
for carbon, not so good for emissions.
Yeah, we can come back to the question later about when you buy an electric car, we are all drinking the Kool-Aid that it is totally 100% environmental thing to do, and over its lifetime, if you keep it for a very long time, of course it is. But if you bought a new one every 3 years and swapped it out, the rare earth materials that go into it and the production that goes into it and all the rest of it means that it's not a net zero thing to do. So our second mini speech is, I've been given very tight orders to who goes. It's Nicholas next, please.
So I was actually going to start as well by just quick show of hands. How many of you got an EV? Just so I know how to pitch it. So quite a high proportion. Good. I think Hugh, if anything, understated how big a task the country's facing, because you all know that from 2030, which is only 8 years and 2 months away, you won't be able to buy a new petrol or diesel car. We don't quite know how many EVs will be on the road by then. The likes of Ofgem have estimated to be about 14 million. Depending how you calculate it, we've got about 300,000 pure battery electric cars. We've got about another 300,000 which can go zero emission, but are actually hybrids of sorts. So it gives you some idea of the scale. So they've got some huge tasks and they'll go through. But I'm a journalist, so you don't just want analysis. You want to get inside track. So this is what I was on holiday last week. This is what one of my best sources sent me. He's not a transport sales saver. It's from my previous job. He's a senior member of the Church of England. And I'll read it out verbatim. From what I've heard, someone in the Cabinet Office, the petrol crisis has been manufactured by government to be the decisive push towards electric vehicles. Next message. I hadn't responded, I was on holiday. If this is right, this is explosive. Explosive. Had you heard that? Is this a genuine message? It is a genuine message. I can inquire further.
I can't believe you're sharing this with the competition.
Well, exactly. So there we have it. You've probably seen the cyclist going viral, taunting the motorists waiting for the fuel. But we've got a much better explanation. Just like COVID did for public transport. You know, you've heard it here. This petrol crisis, it's probably not going to be the first one, is it? Whenever they need a bit of a nudge to get people to switch to EVs, there'll be another nudge. Sadly, we have to work with slightly more tedious analytical stuff here, so let's have a go at it. Firstly, I'd say much of what we hear about, I think it's the dead cat policy. We don't really, as a non-EV driver, but I've driven EVs, I'd say that the picture is a lot more encouraging for EVs and much less so. On the more encouraging side, the politicians, and I'm not going to do lots of trying. Hugh's actually very, very good at what he does, so none of this is meant to make being some pathetic little jive. We always hear about things like the fact that the grant has gone down to £2,500 for a car below 35 grand. Absolutely true. I'd say it's actually irrelevant because I think we're not really focusing what's going on here. Almost all the cars being bought at the moment are company cars on incredibly low. Say, if I pitch this at the wrong level, if you know all about this, just signal very low benefit in kind, 0.1% going up to in the next 3 or 4 years. The other area is salary sacrifice, which means you're getting at 42% off. That is way below £2,500 plug-in grant. They're also, the government's putting an awful lot of money into it on charge points. Again, there are always going to be exceptions to this. But just think about any other product, whether it's, you know, web access, the smartphone, or whatever. You start with the people who are easy to persuade, easy to connect, and then you move outwards. You don't start with the people living in Herefordshire or whatever, a long way from a charging point. So I've said I've driven a number of EVs. I haven't been responsible for one for over a long period of time. But it strikes me, we're looking at it slightly back to front. Actually, most people for most journeys are going to be charging at home. And here's the other good news side of it. The price is a penny a mile in terms of the quotes fuel cost. In other words, electric cost, way below anything you'll get from a petrol or diesel car. Pushes the charges down, lots of nasties as well, because it means you'll be driving a lot more. So again, contrary to some of the reports we get, the number of miles driven will go shooting up. The other thing is you're actually going to be paid. So I found, I wandered around some event called Senex a couple of weeks ago. I had people rushing up to me in the middle of the gas spike 2.5 weeks ago saying, we made 65 quid selling the power back from the car to the grid over 3 nights. The bigger story there, again, I don't want to get distracted, but it's the bigger industrial story, it's the bigger governmental story, it's why they can afford to give these baubles out, these sweeteners, is that it's already been estimated that if we hit our targets in terms of number of EVs, the energy stored in those batteries could give more energy back to the grid than is currently produced in the grid at peak time. So it's a pretty amazing thing. Mm-hmm. There are companies like VW, if I nearly run out of time, companies like VW who in the spring will be launching mainstream so-called vehicle-to-grid charging. sounds very boring, very technical. The thing to remember is, number one, it'll save us from blackouts if it works. Number two, it means you'll be getting several £100 a year back. And if you multiply, we've got 40 million vehicles, not cars, on the roads. That's an awful lot of battery capacity. So there are lots of sweeteners there. On the downside, it's the simple reality, it's the flip side of it being so attractive. So at the moment, every time somebody buys an EV, people like myself, the so-called gas guzzlers, we are subsidising people like Gill to the tune of more than £1,000 because she's not paying her VD, she's not paying basically a series of road charges which will be at least £1,000 per car. Add that up over 40 million, including trucks, you get a nice round figure of about 40 billion, which is the figure we always hear about with the government. So I think if the question is how do you drive EV sales in the next decade, you do actually have to be a bit honest about that, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of upset people whenever the government starts to want to claw money back. And as somebody said, what did they say? It's not the autumn spending review, it's the autumn saving review. When we reach that point, suddenly all these people who've been lured in thinking actually the per mile costs are only this amount, they're going to get very angry. I can go on and on,
No,
but I can ramble on.
we're going to move on to
forever,
our next speaker, although that was excellent. So Gill, it's your turn to talk. And I wondered whether one thing you might want to talk about, we haven't talked about the industry, have we? And the FT is full of articles all the time about every single big motor company in the world.
Can I say one
piling
thing?
money into
Can I say one thing about the industry?
Yeah.
I drive a 20 or 18-year-old VW Passat. It is not a glamorous vehicle. When you have a go in these EVs, which half of you have done, it is truly astonishing what they can do. It is absolutely astonishing. And again, there's plus side, there's downside. The acceleration of some of those, like the Porsche Taycan, it's faster than the McLaren road car. So all those previous...
Is this going to be useful to me living in Twickenham?
Well, it is, because so many people buy a car because of the image and the emotion around it.
No, fair enough.
And
But
actually, those cars, if you're talking about the pull factor, anybody who's driven one of the higher spec Teslas or anything above that,
They
it
do
is
sound
astonishing.
amazing.
Enough of me.
Jill, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jim. And really interested in what Nicholas has said there in terms of, I suppose, the advantages that I, as an electric car driver, so I reap the benefits of zero tailpipe emission driving. And one of the reasons that, or I think one of the fundamental reasons that government has set the 2030 date, the date at which we will no longer be able to buy a new petrol or diesel car or light van, is the fact that in the UK, and these figures are bandied about a lot, but they are accurate, 40,000 people die too soon every year in the UK because of poor air quality that is directly attributable to road transport emissions. And that's at a cost of £20 billion to the UK economy. And I read a headline just the other day that I hadn't picked up previously that said that 3.1 million children in England walk to school every single day, and the air is basically toxic. So this is why we need to continue to make the drive, to zero tailpipe emission driving. You know, and LV General Insurance fully supports the government's 2030 ambitions, fully supports the UK's ambitions towards net zero 2050. But I think that, for me, that's always just fundamentally important in all of this. And it comes back, I suppose, to the fact that we need to stimulate the second-hand electric car market to make it a fairer playing field for everybody. So, you know, an electric car should be available to all people, and it's probably fair to say that at the moment it's not. So something needs to be done on that front. You know, last year, I think it was Hugh, you said that at the moment battery electric vehicles make up only 6% of the entire car market. So if we kind of put some more numbers on that, then
And isn't it just 1% of the entire fleet of existing cars as well?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's correct. But if we look at how many used cars were bought last year, so 6.7 million used cars were bought last year in the UK, and I think about only 1.6 million new cars. So there is a massive opportunity in that second-hand car market. And that really, I think, is where government can focus. And I know that Bright Blue have got some very interesting recommendations, around the idea of a used plug-in car grant, for example. But I think also what we haven't talked about yet is the fact that if we can attract EV manufacturers into the UK, and, I understand that, Rivian's looking at Bristol, I think, which would be amazing, because I would be a very happy person if I got to drive a Rivian one day. And then, so we need investment into the UK, and the opportunities there also for battery gigafactories. I think they've just broken ground in Northumberland, British Volt. So there's masses of opportunity, and then that means that there will be opportunity for upskilling, for reskilling, for new job creation as well, across not just sort of electric vehicles, but charging points installation, charging infrastructure. It moves into home energy storage as well, and solar photovoltaics. So there's a whole opportunity there around the economy that could be stimulated by really focusing support on the EV sector, if you like. And I think that the Prime Minister, has said that that the UK should be the home of EVs. We've certainly got a long way to go, I think, but given the right investment and the sustained right investment, then I would hope that we could get there.
And it feels to me, just reading the FT's coverage by our actual motor specialist, industry specialists, that the changes happened, it seems to have accelerated just in the last year or so. I mean, do you want to give the audience just a sort of sense of how fast the change has been in the last year or so? Yeah,
absolutely. So was it? It was 1 month in lockdown last year, and I think new registrations of battery electric vehicles increased by 344%, sort of on the previous year, and that's phenomenal, isn't it? And registrations are continuing to increase, and I do everything I can to persuade my friends and family to make the switch to electric, and I will always continue to do so. But it's it's how do we do that? So on the one hand, there's the grants, the fiscal incentives, the nudges from government, but then I also think we need a really, really clear communication strategy around supporting electric vehicle uptake. Because what does kilowatt hour mean? What's CCS? What's CHAdeMO? To people who aren't in the know about electric cars. I've had it myself on a recent longer journey. I used a charger at motorway service area station, motorway services, and I have to say that infrastructure is rapidly improving, which is really great news for EV drivers. But I used the wrong connector, so I was getting a really slow charge, and I really needed to be somewhere in a hurry, and it was really quite stressful. And I've been around EVs for a long time, so I can get it wrong, and then I suspect that other people can quite easily get it wrong as well. So, but it's the clear messaging, how to do it, what this means, what you need to do. Brilliant,
thank you very much. And then for our last speaker is Patrick Hall from Bright Blue. And talk as much as you like about your views, but one question for you is, can you envisage a situation where everything goes wrong and we all go out and buy EVs and the government fails to create the infrastructure and we end up with people punching each other on electric forecourts because literally they've failed to keep pace with the kind of consumer and the industry trends that are happening suddenly really fast?
I don't think we're going to see people rushing out to buy brand new EVs overnight, and even if they would like to, the weight on supply chains for new vehicles wouldn't allow for it anyway. But I wanted to jump back to your point that you first mentioned in your opening remarks around price parity. So in large part, the premium that you pay for an EV, if you compare an EV to its petrol or diesel counterpart, the premium that you're paying is in large part derived from the lithium-ion battery that powers the vehicle. The price of lithium-ion batteries has come down substantially. So in 2010, it was around $1,000 per kilowatt hour. That's now down to about $150 and is set to go even further low to $100 per kilowatt hour by the middle of the decade. Forecasts show that it is at that point that we achieve price parity with petrol and diesel vehicles. So I think there's also something to be said for up-speccing as well. And what I mean by this is that in the past, whilst the price of lithium-ion batteries has gone down, rather than reduce the cost of the vehicle, manufacturers have decided to extend the range because that's what consumers have demanded. So you haven't seen that cost saving from the batteries being passed on to the consumers until now, where you're starting to see that happen because we've got the range at about 200 plus miles. Consumers are satisfied with that range and they're wanting to see price reductions in terms of the upfront price. So I think we're nearing the point where we see price parity, and I think we will see that around the middle of this decade. That brings me on to my next point around grants. I think we are starting to shift away from grants for new EVs as that price parity gets closer. Instead, I think that EV uptake should be driven by a ZEV mandate, and Hugh has outlined how that would work. However, I do think that it is worth government considering the introduction of a second-hand plug-in car grant, a grant for a second-hand EV, which only applies to low-income households. This policy is already in play in France and in the Netherlands, and it's basically born out of the fact that there is a price premium still in the second-hand market. When there's price parity in the brand new market in the middle of the decade, it's not going to exist in the second-hand market. Second-hand EVs are still going to be more expensive. For instance, the average price of a petrol or diesel vehicle in the second-hand market is about £12,000, whereas for an EV it's about 25. So I think by introducing a second-hand plug-in car grant, it would help to dispel the narrative that EVs are only for the wealthy and would enable people on lower incomes to purchase EVs. Now, you might say if this grant was £2,000, well, that's not a lot of money. But if you think about a second-hand Renault Zoe, which is on the cheaper end of the EV market, retailing at £8,000, then a £2,000 second-hand EV grant is basically giving you a 25% reduction in the upfront price. I think that's a meaningful difference to low-income households. So I think that policy is worthy of consideration by government. I also want to just second the panel's thoughts around bolstering the second-hand market. I think that's incredibly important, that we get more EVs into the second-hand market. Obviously, a ZEV mandate is one way to do that, driving EV uptake as quickly as possible. The sooner we get people buying EVs, the sooner they trickle down into the second-hand market. But I also think that we need to think about the fleet sector here, because the fleet sector is one of the most reliable sources of vehicles into the second-hand car market. That's because they have such regular turnover of vehicles. In our report that we published on EVs, we recommended extending enhanced capital allowances for EVs to the renting and leasing sector, basically making EVs tax deductible for renting and leasing companies. The average turnover time of vehicles for renting and leasing companies is 3 years, so by incentivising them to purchase EVs, we'd see those EVs make their way into the second-hand market a lot faster. And just finally, on charging infrastructure, the government's announcement around charging infrastructure being required within new builds is hugely welcome. We've got a long way to go in terms of public charging. I think we've got 26,000 charge points at the moment. Some forecasts are suggesting we're going to need half a million by 2050. So there's a long way to go. And just on Hugh's point around interoperability, it's an excellent point. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with the concept, but for those of you who aren't, the easiest way of explaining it is kind of like global roaming on your phone when you go to another country and you automatically connect to their network, and then your network provider and the network provider that you connect with in the other country talk to each other and settle the price difference. So it's the same principle but applied to EV charging. Basically means you don't have to carry 5 different cards to take a trip from London to Scotland and charge up in different networks along the way. I think interoperability is really quite nascent in the UK at the moment. One way that could be catalysed is through making interoperability a condition. for government funding for charging networks. So that's something else for the government to consider. But I will stop there, Jim, and hand back to you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to throw this open to the floor in a second. I just wanted to greedily step in with a couple of questions of my own. I don't mind who answers either of these, but basically any of you. And the first question is, we had a meeting with the Faraday Institute at the FT a couple of years ago, who are the kind of experts in batteries. They really understand batteries. And they said something that I'd never even thought about before, which was that car batteries from an electric car, they were unable to recycle. Has that changed, or is that still an issue? And that seems quite unenvironmental for an environmental vehicle.
Yeah, there's actually a massive demand for used electric car batteries for a variety of storage applications.
As in energy storage?
Energy storage applications. So there is actually demand for
Fantastic. So that's not a problem.
EV batteries.
And I was very interested in what Nicholas was saying earlier about how this could become a kind of the collective battery storage for the electricity system, because of course with renewable energy we have the problem of intermittency, and being able to solve that with a kind of organic system of 30 million batteries could be an amazing future. The other question I have for any of you is, what's going to happen to hybrids? We haven't even talked about hybrids at all. Are they basically doomed? It's not really part of the discussion we've had for the last 40 minutes.
So I'd say on plug-in hybrids, so on the plug-in hybrid front, most plug-in hybrids have a range of maybe say 20-25 miles, which is fine if you drive them on electric, but the moment you stop driving them on the sort of on the battery, if you like, they become quite costly and inefficient to drive. So yeah, I think and certainly as LV General Insurance, we'd encourage the government to bring those into the 2030 ban as well.
And Nicholas, you probably talk to the manufacturers more than anyone else here. Do you get the impression that they're sort of taking the foot off the pedal on hybrids and just pushing forward with electrics, or are they still doing both?
I don't know the answer to that. I can flannel and say what I'm hearing, but
does anyone in the audience know?
Yeah.
I'd like to just come in on that point there. I think what you're seeing with regulations globally, whether it's a ZEV mandate, whether it's CO2 standards, they are tightening to the point where hybrids that are providing 30 miles of emission-free range are no longer being consistent with the regulatory requirements. So manufacturers are basically just shifting to all electric.
Although in Britain, of course, we have the 2030 phased out of petrol and diesel, but you can keep going with hybrids till 2035, can't you? So it could still be worth, the life cycle means you could still keep producing for a while.
Yes.
So you've all been really patient. I'm going to take the gentleman in the flourish. Can you stop? You need to wait for the mic because of the recording happening at the back. Thank you.
This is not going to be my question. This is to help you with the hybrid point. I own a hybrid plug-in and a BEV. Okay, and where I think plug-in hybrids have value in the market today is in educating all of those people wedded to their internal combustion engines. It's a way of them getting into the electric plug-in without them losing that comfort blanket of their ICE. That's where I think hybrids play today. Then as soon as somebody gets their BEV, they think, why the hell did I ever have an ICE? Okay, but you just talk to everybody and they just think, horrendous range anxiety, I don't understand plug-in, I don't understand the benefits of it, so I want to hedge. And I think hybrids play that role in the hedge. That's my experience.
So do you think anyone will be driving a hybrid in 2030?
No, but that sort of brings me to my real question.
And who's it for on the panel, please?
Okay. Actually, I think it's for everybody. No, sorry, let's go for you're not the minister, are you? You're the chair of the select committee, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I'm not a minister. Our job is to scrutinise government performance. So I'm anything.
I have a problem with
minister.
I have a problem with the fiscal incentives. So as I said, I have a BEV. I call it a Rishi special. This BEV is done through salary sacrifice, and therefore I get the credit at the marginal rate. Now, some people's marginal rate is 62%. Okay, so some people are getting these BEVs at less than half price. I don't have a problem with that. Where I have a problem is that the general public don't have access to that kind of fiscal benefit. So it's only really a very small set of people that are able to have these Rishi specials. And I think what we really need to be doing, if we want to incentivise a wider range of people to take up the VEVs, is to change the fiscal stimulus so that it doesn't just allow.
So
this
is your question to Hugh? Does
Yes.
he think the government should be?
I
doing that with the
I
tax
think
system?
the question is two things. What do you think about the way that you do it at source, which is that incentive? And also, I don't agree with what you were talking about second hand. I think the simplest way is to simplify the tax code and change the VAT, so that there's a lower VAT on a BEV than there is on an ICE.
So, I mean, all I would say is that, this is not government money, this is taxpayers' money we're talking about here, and what is largely a private market decision as to whether to buy a car or not. So, as Nicholas has touched on, you're already not paying vehicle excise duty, you're not paying fuel duty, and if you're charging at home, you're paying VAT at 5%. Actually, if you're charging on the road, you're charged 20%. Actually, that's a real issue. It's about 60 to 80% cheaper, the National Audit Office have said, to charge at home, where I don't want to generalise, you might have to have a bigger home if you've got to drive. So there's already an issue out there, and Nicholas is also right to touch on. The Department for Transport want to push more EVs out there, so therefore they don't want to talk about road pricing. If you're the Treasury and you've got a £35 billion black hole, and the taxpayer and road user isn't stupid, they know that someone's got to pay for it, then you know that road pricing is round the corner. But largely the reason why I support the ZEV mandate is because I don't believe in taxpayers actually having to subsidise other people, often with higher incomes, to be able to buy a car. I just don't think that's right for those taxpayers that can't afford it themselves.
So Hugh, sorry to interrupt, but at what point should the ministers, the government, be admitting that road pricing is an inevitability in over 5-10 years' time? Should they start warming people up, or is it?
It's already going on. So it's already going on. We've got a select committee, and let me put it this way: by being a Conservative chair of the Transport Select Committee, I can get a good idea as to where the future lies and where the government is actually looking for it to lie. And then I can actually come up with the recommendations rather than just moaning about how rubbish everything is. So, I wouldn't be in the space if I didn't actually feel the government were not in that space as well.
But the odd thing is, the Times did a splash probably 8 months ago saying some unit in the Treasury is looking at road pricing. And Rishi Sunak's team the next day will definitely dampen down this one from.
We call it the nudge.
rainfall.
We call it the nudge factor, and actually sometimes you need select committees, you need bright blues to actually come out with the reports which actually get the public there, and then all of a sudden the government go there as well. Look, I'm a very straight talking person, which is why I'm not a minister. I'd rather we actually were completely level with the public and said, look, not only is road pricing coming because something's got to pay for the roads that all these EVs are going to use, but we can actually use it to really show price as a lever, reduce the number of cars on the road at the peak times, because you can price differently. We've got the technology for this now. It's really exciting. But that's why I'm not a government minister, because I'm so naive. So I'm a firm believer in talking straight, but it is coming. And I hope that did answer your question in general. My point is, I don't believe in taxpayer subsidies.
I think Nicholas wants to jump in there.
Just a small thing there that, if I remember correctly, because when I wrote about this, BVRLA, which represent the fleet buyers, they actually, I think it was even a submission to your committee, they said they expect road charging by 2025, and they want the clarity of it, again, for these same reasons. They don't want to march up the hill and then down again.
Yeah.
I think there was a lady at the back who's been waiting quite a while to ask a question. If we could give her the mic, please.
Just if I could start off by saying that I'm sold on EV. Sorry. I'm sold on EV anyway, but I've got a couple of practical questions, and you kind of tipped on it on the batteries. So if it's naive or silly, my question, I apologise in advance.
And is your question for anyone in particular?
Whoever can answer it. I have no idea which one of you can answer it. But do the batteries, do they run out? And if they do, how easy is it to recycle or dispose of them?
So I can say a few words on that.
Thank you.
In the sort of, I suppose, more modern battery electric vehicles, then those batteries will last for hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of miles. So actually, it should not be an issue at all. Maybe the very early maybe the very early model Nissan Leaf, you will see some battery degradation after so many miles. But I think general thinking within industry is that for some time now, and certainly going forwards with the new electric cars, battery life should not be an issue at all. And as we said a few moments ago as well, then there is actually great demand for battery reuse in many types of storage application.
Can I ask a slightly different sort of consumer question, which is, I think we've probably got a range of people here where we've got a lot of people who know a lot about electric cars, other people looking at dipping their toe in the water. How long does it take to charge an electric car? And am I right in thinking it totally varies as to where you're charging it?
Yeah, it does. So if you can charge at home overnight, then it will take a few hours, maybe 6 hours. However, generally the way that people are using their electric cars, then they don't tend to drive it until it's very low on range. So, you know, myself, like many others, I will just top up my charge. So I might charge every other week or once every 3 weeks or something, and I let it get down to about 100 miles, then I'll just top it up, and that's it. If you are using a public charge point, then it does vary, but generally you can charge to very low range to about 80% in 20-30 minutes.
And am I right in thinking that some chargers are, that's like the fast charger, isn't it? And you can also get a slow one.
Yes, correct. So you might go to your local zoo, for example, as I do quite often with my children, and I might plug in to charge there, and that will be on one of the slower chargers, and that will, you know, over a few hours, it will give me a decent amount of range.
Got it.
There are 20,000 charge points out there, and I think 4,000 charge points, tell me if I'm right, rapid charge points. So,
and do people find themselves queuing for ages? Is that a common occurrence? Or do you get pinch points in demand?
Well, actually, the big challenge. So, actually, one thing's really frustrating when we did the report. So, I contacted my own county council in East Sussex to say we really don't have enough charge points here, and they said, "Oh well, we haven't got the money." And I said, "Well, actually, there's a government fund which is not being tapped into by local authorities. I think it's about a third underspent."
Yeah.
And then their response was, "Oh, well, it's all too difficult to bid." So a lot of this is actually not just at government level; it's actually at local authority level. And also tying charging infrastructure into the planning bill would be really welcome. But the other thing I just want to come back on, because we're talking everything up as being purely green. I mean, I call them zero-emission vehicles. People get cross because they're not. Because the reality is that, you know, if you look at our energy production, only 40% comes from renewables. So the other 60% is dirty. And the other thing about batteries is that you're talking about lithium, which is, you know, we get this from certain countries of ill repute. And there's a concern about what that does to the environment as well. So let's not kid ourselves that this is 100% green. Actually, it's not. So we should just be level with you. Sorry, Nicholas.
I'm only smiling because it's when you say that's why you're not a minister, daring to say that.
Yeah.
If I ever say that, I get on social media get so much flack if you dare say that EVs are, you know, yes, you remove the tailpipe emissions, but there are other things.
Yeah, and there are social issues around sort of child labourers mining for cobalt in the Congo.
Yeah.
I might have made that specific example
can I
better than me.
Can I challenge just something else? Is that all right? Or have you got another? Sorry,
I feel like we should. I feel like we ought to. Cause we only had 2 questions from you.
Sorry.
I feel like we should take a couple.
Sorry,
lady at the front. Thank you. We're going to come back to you.
No, I'm restrain me.
Before the reshuffle, Minister McLean said that she would lay legislation for interoperability of charge points. What happens to the charge points that are already installed? Like, do they have to become interoperable, or how would those be dealt with?
That's a really good point. So actually, she said that to our committee. So, you know, it was one of the sort of recommendations. And when she came back to talk to us about the transport decarbonisation policy, she committed to legislating in the autumn, which I believe is now, for interoperability. Or she might have actually said that before summer, but we've had that commitment. So now the trick is to make sure we do. And you make a really good point, because it would have to be to all, and therefore there have to be a way of making sure that it can.
I'm being stupid.
You can have that, and ChargePoint may actually know better.
What do we mean by interoperability, just first?
So actually, as Patrick explained with a much better example on my cash point, so effectively it doesn't really matter, you know, what your account is. And Patrick, why don't you explain it again?
You mean like the bank account where
basically, like you use your mobile
thing.
phone. Say you're with EE here in the UK, you go to Germany and connect to Deutsche Mobile, if that's the thing, and then you use your data there. You return to the UK. You've done nothing. You don't even know. You haven't had to accept any payment or anything. It just all happens automatically, and your pricing stays the same. Deutsche Mobile and EE speak to each other and settle the price between each other. And equally, if someone from Germany comes to the UK and they're on a Deutsche Mobile contract and they connect to EE here, nobody knows the difference. It's very
And this is
convenient for the
because
consumer.
I've been honest from the start that I know almost nothing about this subject, and I'm here to learn. So obviously I'm aware that Tesla has charging points for Tesla cars.
Yeah.
Are all the other charging points for everything else, or do you have other manufacturers who have their own?
Tesla,
Subways.
Tesla's supercharge network is for Tesla, although, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're looking at opening that up.
Yes.
But for the other charge points, they're open to all EVs.
Okay, brilliant. Next question. Gentleman at the front, on your left.
A couple of observations, if I may, please. First of all, when Gill started off, she was talking about the cost of things. She didn't mention the cost of car insurance, because when I went to LV, it was $1,500 for an electric car, whereas my previous vehicle was $460 a year. So there is a significant difference for electric vehicles with some suppliers. The second thing, I want to challenge the term range anxiety. Nowadays in this country, there's no such thing as range anxiety, it's charger anxiety. You don't know when you get to the end, is it going to be broken? Is it going to be blocked by a petrol-driven car? Because people will just park in the slot. How long is somebody else there? That's the issue. You can make a plan and you know where you're going, you arrive there, and then you can't use it. So you always have to have a plan B and probably a plan C as well. It's not that there aren't enough chargers.
Got it.
You can't use them.
Over to you, Jill.
Yeah, so just on the insurance point, so all I'll say on that, if I may, is that I insure my electric car with LV General Insurance, and I got a comparable deal to what I was insuring my diesel for. So I think there are lots of, variations there maybe, but I'm happy with my insurance. And I think then on the public charging infrastructure front, I think the really good news that we've been seeing recently is that charge point operators are beginning to install more chargers for public use. So I think soon gone will be the days of just one or two chargers in one place. Charging hubs are emerging. We know that GridServe are rolling out 100 of their electric forecourts across the country. They're doing a brilliant job of upgrading all the chargers on motorway service areas, the electric highway, and also we hear as well recently that Osprey are going to be rolling out 150 charging hubs. So that's a significant number of chargers.
And am I right in thinking that I read in the FT that the number of moving parts in an electric vehicle is only 20 or 30, and with a petrol car it's kind of 150, and therefore the maintenance cost over the lifetime of the vehicle ought to be cheaper? Is that one's
Yes,
understanding?
it's true, and I'd also chuck in one other thing, which is we got hold of data from the biggest fleet firm in Britain, Lex Auto Leasing, who said that for the first 8 months of this year, the accident rate was about half that of ICE cars, which is quite a big deal.
Why?
I'm surprised more people didn't get excited by that.
Why? What's the rationale for that?
Everybody asks why, we don't know. We just know.
They're all new cars, aren't they? So they've all got good range, good kind of bumper tech, and
No.
radar systems. And
I don't want to. I don't want to. All we know
Mine's
is
always
it's.
been like that anyway.
Yeah, but this is Lex Auto Leasing, so it's the comparable fleet
Yeah.
with their other. They have the same age fleet for EVs or for the ICE cars. So everything else is comparable.
So it literally could be technical, or it could be the mindset of the electric
Well,
vehicle
it could be
driver
it could
is
be
more
the
cautious
mindset.
or
It
something.
could be something which again provokes the EV drivers, that people, when you drive fast, you can actually see that the dare I say it, the range dropping, and people go slower. Whatever, it might just be that EV drivers are wonderful, caring, warm human beings who are really responsible.
And there was something you were going to say 5 minutes ago, and I didn't give you an opportunity. What was?
Well,
Can you
it was
remember what
just that I think it's fascinating, this idea of worrying about the identity politics end of it, or the fairness end of it. But I'm a bit baffled by the stance of, in fact, everybody on this panel, because I can see the problem, say, of somebody getting a 62% tax break. But if you look at the way other other things have rolled out, like the internet or smart cars or whatever, you don't say, let's get you have a phrase which is early adopters, and there's a reason for that. So instead of nudging people who are not early adopters, you start with exactly those sort of people who are. So I'm a bit baffled by all this stuff about, and sorry, I don't mean to be ungracious to the host who does know more than I do on this, from Bright Blue, but why worry now about the second-hand car market when so few cars are out there? Just pump up that number.
But it's a one and the same thing. You can't really separate out the two. The reason why we worry about it now is because new purchases today won't be in the second-hand market for 7 years. So the uptake in EVs that we see today, we don't see that effect in 7 years' time. So the sooner that can happen, the better. But we want to get more people driving EVs anyway. I don't think that they're competing priorities.
You were talking earlier.
I just think you have to think about what is it you're trying to achieve here. What you're actually trying to achieve is reduce the carbon count. And there's only a certain amount of public money to do so. So it's right to ask about the subsidy levels and would that person have bought one anyway. I can see other inequalities arriving down the track. Say when Hugh ends up having to pay 18, 20, 25 pence per unit for his electricity, whereas Gill's getting it for a penny.
And you were talking about the subsidy obviously being the carrot, and then of course the stick is the regulatory framework. You were talking earlier about how regulation is going to push manufacturers towards EVs, which is of course true. Do you think there will be more, clean emission zones of the sort we've seen in 2 or 3 different ones in London? Do you think other cities will start rolling them out? Do you think that's a feature of the next 10, 15 years?
I think we will do, yeah. I think we will see more clean air zones. It's one way for local authorities to generate some more revenue. We've actually done a bit of work in the past, quite some years ago now, where we were advocating for more clean air zones and for that funding to be ring-fenced by local authorities and then put back into local initiatives combating air pollution. So I do think you will see an increase in clean air zones.
Are there any specific cities you can think of that are talking about it or consulting?
Manchester.
One we're in. So, I mean, I don't know if there are any Mancunians here, but you...
I work for TFGM as well.
Right, so you'll be able to tell us. So some years back, the Manchester public rejected the idea of having road pricing in the city. The question is whether it gets dressed up as a clean air zone, then it actually delivers the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that has been, if you go on social media, that's absolutely been the response, even though, the clean air zone isn't going to affect private cars whatsoever. So all the modelling that's been done over the kind of 3 or 4 year period for that has said that, targeting business vehicles, HGVs and buses will be first, which is in May next year. And then after that, it will be taxis and light goods vehicles. So private cars, aren't affected, but, as soon as we put out a tweet or anything on Facebook, it is immediately jumping on that it is, a tax, it's the congestion charge all over again, because it's so fresh in people's minds. But again, people don't understand the size of the zone either. So the congestion zone was supposed to be within the boundaries of the M60. The clean air zone is going to be 500 square miles. It's going to be the biggest one outside of London. It's absolutely enormous, and it will affect people. It will affect businesses. But we've been working through that with government to try to find the right incentives to get people into cleaner vehicles. Yeah. But a lot has even over that period of time, a lot of stuff has happened in that 3 or 4 year period, where actually cities are taking that extra step and going to low emission zones. We've got the city centre of Manchester here, which will be treated in the same way as Wigan and Bury and Bolton. And again, people will see some disparity in that a major city like this should maybe go in that step further. But it's taken us so long to get to, we've not even implemented the zone yet, and it will probably be like 4 years in the making of doing that.
That's absolutely fascinating.
There's quite a lot of work going on.
I feel like we're definitely not going to go all the way through to 7:30 because it's been a long day, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions if there are any more questions.
Sorry, can I just ask one more?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go for it.
It's just a quick one about, we're saying about interoperability and things like that. We've talked about bridging the gap between car ownership and things like that. What's the panel's feeling on the disparity moving forward of, we did touch on it slightly, but people that own driveways and areas that have off-street parking versus those that don't. Gill mentioned quite a lot about the investment that companies are making. I work I'm like EV delivery officer for TFGM, so I understand the intricacies of putting charging points on mass. As soon as it's been free in Manchester for 6-7 years, we started our charge on Monday as on Friday as a tariff, and our network usage halved overnight. So we saw that drop pretty much immediately.
I think this is probably a question for you.
Yeah,
I think.
just knowing how much it costs to put that infrastructure in. I know there's grants. I know people are working through that, but you know, my biggest worry as a delivery officer and coming out and talking about electric vehicles is knowing there will be a disparity moving forward for people that have a driveway and those that don't in 5-10 years time, and I'm not really sure how we bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's really tricky because I mean you can't say, okay, well if you're charging at home then we'll charge you 20% in terms of VAT, because you don't know what they're actually doing with that energy usage. I don't believe that you can actually differentiate. Yeah. So do you find another way of actually taxing everyone as a whole, or do you actually find a way to actually close the market? And also, I mean, I don't know this, but you know, is technology around the corner to actually make it a lot easier to charge? But you know, part of it also comes down to change of behaviour. Yeah. So yes, at home maybe you're charging overnight all the way through, but if you actually don't have that ability, then the little but often approach, and certainly sort of speaking to ChargePoint, I mean, you look at actually if you charge for more than X amount of hours, then it will actually cost you more. Yeah. And then as you then go to the supermarket, you charge. You go to the cinema, you charge. And then the point is making sure that the facility is actually there. But it is like the biggest challenge is how do you actually address the household that you just talked about, which is my household.
I think we have another question, lady over here on the left, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on this point because I work for a charging company and I also chair the trade association for charging companies as well, so probably right for me to interject at this point. And you specifically asked the question, you know, is the technology there to ensure that there's equitable access to charging that's fairly priced? And the answer is yes. You know, the thing that's not happening is it's not being implemented either at local authority level or, you know, just more widely in car parks, retail destinations, that kind of thing. And that's a matter of time. You know, there's an education process that has to happen with businesses that deploy charging infrastructure as well as with drivers about what a good charging experience looks like. And it's boring and techie, but it's more so about the software than it is about the physical piece of kit that you plug your car into. And it speaks as well to the earlier point about interoperability and what to do with the existing chargers out there. Quite a lot of them can be interoperable because the thing that makes chargers talk to each other from different networks is the software. So it doesn't matter what the kit is, the software that sort of sits behind it is the brains that makes things interoperable. The issue is that it's not very nicely named legacy estate of dumb chargers. I think we've got to collectively find a better name for them, but the ones that can't communicate with anything, they really are a plug on the wall or a plug on a post. Those are the ones that urgently need to be upgraded to guarantee consumers.
Can I put a question back on you, which is how do you envisage the future in 20 years' time? You know, where will these electric cars be being charged? Will they be the existing service stations, motorway garages and lamp posts? Or do you foresee it being 10 times bigger than that, 20 times? Are they going to have to build a whole load new actual space? You know, not just infrastructure on existing places, but will you have to sort of expand all over the place?
All of the above. I think that it's right that people who can and have the facility to charge at home will mostly do that, but absolutely will need on-street and inter-urban infrastructure as well. I'm reliant on it. I have an EV with no driveway and no dedicated parking space. So the millions of people like me will need somewhere to charge that's reliable. And then the other point really about what the next 20 years looks like is that universality of the experience. So any card, whether it's my credit card, a membership card, whatever it is I want to do to plug in, to charge my vehicle, I can plug in and use that card and it will just work. And it won't be broken, I think is the key.
Fantastic, fantastic. Brilliant. So for very selfish reasons, which is that my news editor's just called me 4 times in a row because there's probably some legal issue with something that's about to go to print. I'm going to wrap up the event, but obviously if you want to talk to each other, and there's probably some booths left
I
there.
I would have replied by now.
Yeah, so I will in a second. So thank you very much to everyone. I'm going to wrap up properly. Thank you LVGI, thank you Bright Blue for organising this event. And thank you, panellists, for speaking. And you can sign up to become a member of Bright Blue by speaking to any of the Bright Blue team here with some kind of discounted offer. But talk to them, not me, about that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jill.